this web open to discussion and open conversation without the influence of the corporations, advertising, whatever. Because right now it's a free discussion, and this is where all the information is coming out. And in the future, if we're ever going to get into this golden age, we got to have an unimpeded conversation, and that's probably never been the case in recent 1,000 years or so, because there's always been somebody out there that has suppressed information. Right now, I can put anything out here on the web I want to, for the most part, and nobody cares, and that's important. Okay, this is a video of my 2002 Volkswagen on just going down the highway normally, getting 40 miles to the gallon. Okay, that CP4U-F3 was originally designed for real high speed, and it still does quite well. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about what Gerard Morin has done relative to Tesla's program that he came out with in 1900s with the Wardenclyffe Tower. And what he's done is he's discovered quite a few things about it that were totally unknown to me, and I've been studying this thing for probably 25 years. So it's a whole new discussion as far as I'm concerned, and it's certainly relative to everything that I've done in the last 10 that changes everything in a lot of ways. So here we go. A lot of people know about Wardenclyffe Towers. It was designed by Nikola Tesla in about 1900, something like that, and they started the construction in 1901. During the construction, Westinghouse and Tesla went out to the site, and Westinghouse looked at the construction. He says, "What's this thing do?" Well, Tesla had done a lot of work with him, so he had quite a bit of leeway. But he said, "Well, it creates electricity." And Tesla said, "Well, how's it work?" And he says, "Well, it's a free energy device, and it pulls electricity down, and it can be used any place." And he said, "Well, how do we meter?" Well, that started a long discussion, and Westinghouse said, "If you can't meter it, we don't want it. We can't sell it." He said, "What good's it to me?" And he stopped the project, and ended up, they tore it down, I think 1917. But what Tesla had done there, and I didn't understand this until just actually yesterday when I watched Gerard's video, is he had a receiving antenna, not a generating tower, as I had assumed. Everybody knew that it was a free energy device of some kind, but nobody quite understood the whole system. And what Gerard did was he went back and he studied the actual, I think he's an engineer, an electrical engineer, I don't know, but he went back and studied the materials in the tower itself, and it's full of several tons of copper in the top. And what he immediately realized was that this was a an antenna, an RF antenna that brought energy in from everywhere. The Earth is an RF generating station of types. So this thing brought in our radio frequency energy, and I think it probably distributed it some way, but everybody knew somewhere along the line that we could put these things on, hook these antenna devices up to our houses and our any kind of a appliance and run it on this station. Actually, Tesla had one of these things in his lab down in, I think it was Arizona, where he had his lab, and he had it running and working, so he knew it would work. This was not an experiment. It was an actual device, and it was the first one ever made, and the last one ever made. Nobody is going to finance a device like that commercially. If there ever was one, it had to be done by the government, and the government obviously isn't going to do it either, because how do they tax it? So in Gerard's talk, he takes an electric motor and he puts a piece of cardboard next to it, and he puts another motor there, and that's not running. The first motor is hooked up, and he measures the frequency coming out, or the voltage coming out of the other motor, and the other motor's putting out energy even though it's not turning. I immediately recognized the fact that we could probably put our lab crystals where the second motor is and do the same thing. We haven't done it yet, but I'm sure down the line we'll try it. It's an obvious experiment that needs to be done, and we've been using these lab crystals for, I don't know, 5-10 years, something like that, and running cars on them. So we know these things actually can be programmed to do just about anything like that. So it's an obvious system for us. So this is a direct tie-in with what we've been doing all along. Our first device was what we have patented, and that's a Hall effect, as we call it, and that uses frequencies too. And what we did was we put frequencies in oil on a car, and we got improvements in both mileage and horsepower. It worked every time. It was just a little bit hard to make the device do that. To put the oil frequencies into the water required a little bit of work. And when we got the crystals on working, we realized that we didn't have to have anything hooked up. And not having anything hooked up made it a superior device in a lot of ways, because all you do is just put it in the car somewhere, and the car picks it up and figures it out. And so there you go. We also use these crystals to heal people in combination with geometry. What we call, well, they're fractals, but they're sacred geometry, and you'll see the sacred geometry on this beginning and end of this tape. I make it all the time. It's easy, but each piece of sacred geometry does a certain thing, and you have to know what they're doing in order to use them correctly. And it takes that's a lot fairly sophisticated knowledge. Next, we use what we call living water now. It's not on the market yet, but it will be. And this water has in it various frequencies, just like just like the tower. These frequencies, the way I see it, will eventually do away with the need for food, because if you go to Dan Nelson's site, you'll find that you'll hear him talk about his water, which is very similar to this but not as good, that could do away with food, and he talks about people that have done away with food. Basically, all food does is produce frequency. So that frequency enters the cell through the cell wall, and the food is just secreted from the system. So it's just a matter of transporting the energy across the cell, not the actual food. There's no food that goes into the mitochondria where all the energy is made. Another thing that comes out of this is the obvious fact that prayer, which I don't recommend as it's done, but I've talked about it quite a bit on other tapes, is basically a connection, spiritual connection using radio frequency. And the way it really works is that when you pray, the radio frequency goes up, strikes the upper atmosphere, and comes back and materializes, if it does. It doesn't have to, but it could. The problem with prayer is that you're asking for things spiritually, and you shouldn't be, because spirituality works through allowing, not by trying to manipulate it, which often prayer is. Now, sometimes prayer is just thankfulness and appreciation, and that's fine. Not a problem. You don't create problems until you start to try to change things. Now, that's different from cause, and I've talked about that on other videos too. Cause is essential. You have to learn to be cause, and not to be effect. But let's move on. This information is essential to what we do, and we do it on cars, machines, biology. So we can change how things, the efficiency of people's bodies, a car, by changing the frequency, and that's been done on the web for a number of years. The Joe Cell started trying to do that, and I joined that group, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that, when it was started anyway. And the whole idea of that is to change the frequency of the car using a condenser, which we call it, which was called the Joe Cell. So we have quite a few things here that work off of this frequency that I've been talking about, and that transfer of frequency between the motor and the motor that's not running is obvious proof that what we're talking about works. It actually does transfer. Now, we have put these things on cars and had them transfer to other cars, had the energy transfer to other cars and have them work better than the car we had it on. Did that just in July, but it's been going on for years. Always a mind blower when it happens, but it does. And it's almost always works to some degree. Sometimes it works a lot better than other times, and it's got to do with a lot of different things. But my question after that is, why did Westinghouse endorse a product that essentially harms people with EMF and we know kills him? Maybe he didn't know that. Maybe he didn't. He thought his electricity was just as good as the other, but it's not true. We know today that EMF causes cancer. If you sleep next to with an electric blanket or next to something with a lot of power over a long length of time, that decreases your immune system. Now that alone doesn't cause cancer, and I've talked about that on other tapes too. Eventually, you have to move that line down below the cancer line with different toxins of different kinds, maybe the same kind. You can do it with just nuclear radiation, but there are lots of products on the market right now, including health products that are sold for health, and certainly ones that are made for beauty that actually kill people over a long period of time. But it takes a good deal of products like that to cause cancer. But something, I mean, there's plenty of it out there, and plenty of people are getting cancer now. Not as many as people who get heart disease, but it's close. So if we have things like electrical generation now, and I don't know how long this has been known. It was certainly suppressed at that time, but when Tesla died, most of his stuff was confiscated by the government. Didn't anybody know what this radio frequency electricity, if I call it electricity, it isn't on this tape, but it certainly is electrical. Did the government know that this was true? And if they did they decide not to let it out? It's a good question, I think. Drugs in general are negative systems. They always affect you negatively, while they may increase something positively. And cancer drugs are probably the worst ones. I've talked about those on other tapes too. So the next question is, why did the homeopaths lose out to the allopaths, the AMA and the FDA, which backs all of these? And certainly some states like California will not allow people to, or doctors to actually do any outside work other than what the three biggies that they allow, and that's surgery, radiation therapy, or chemotherapy, which are all causes of cancer. When you and this was known when I was a kid. I remember hearing it when I was like 4. When you get cancer surgery and they cut you, you die right away. Well, people notice things. Today, that's disputed by almost all doctors. But if you know what cancer's about, and I've talked about it, I'm not going to go into that too deep. But if you know what cancer's about, and you know that it's trying to keep you alive by some way or another, putting these toxins in, getting these toxins away from the liver, and you cut it, and that tissue with the toxins in it, and it's very different in how it works if you look into it. workings of cancer tissue, or the chemistry of cancer tissue is quite a bit different than normal tissue. It has to be. But if you know that that's released into the body, it only makes sense that it would cause cancer. Again, it's disputed. So, if you don't know that this is true, or you don't believe it's true, and you have your own system, which the medicine world today has created, how can you repair it? How can you make it better if you don't think that what you're doing causes problems? If you don't believe that your food causes cancer, how can you keep people from getting cancer? You can't. All right, so moving on. Coal, oil, natural gas are all popular forms of energy, and they all create problems. If you go back to the 40s and you look at what happened in Pittsburgh with the air pollution, various other cities where they had inversions, it was pretty bad, and that was only 40 years away from when Nikola Tesla created this infinite energy that he had. Think about how many people died as a result. How many people have died today, we don't know, but it probably causes cancer often. That the various waste that goes into the atmosphere and the water and whatever, because of not having an infinite form of energy that he created, this infinite form that he created. And the government endorses this energy. Why do they? What's the reason for our laws? To protect the industry or protect us? I think that's a fair question. I mean, we supposedly are the people that vote for and run our government, but we're not. Obviously, we're not. If the government were out to help us, they wouldn't allow this. They wouldn't have torn up his papers and thrown them away, and they wouldn't allow many things like this to happen. Okay, next topic. Questions about what might happen in the future, and some of the applications here from Gerard that I just discussed. Now, we heard Gerard play music on the frequencies on his motors, and that's I think one of the keys here, because that pretty much guarantees that these are FM, or not FM, but radio frequencies, but it doesn't necessarily prove that they are. I mean, maybe they're somewhat different, but they pick up radio frequencies. We got a ways to go here. And then the next question after that is, what can we do to modulate them, as we do with fractals and store them in lab crystals, very dependably now. So that from that, can we use them? Can we use them together in some way? Maybe we can generate these frequencies and use them with what we're doing also, and make them even more powerful. I think that's a critical possibility, and maybe we can do that on cars too. Maybe we can create frequencies that make a car run better. I think that'd be kind of cool. Maybe it'd be funny noises, but I don't know. Maybe it isn't a noise. Who knows? But we know what we're doing on car. The thing we've been doing on cars just scratches the surface, in a lot of ways. But even if we get 275 miles to a gallon dependably down the road at say 40 miles an hour average, the question always is, if you can get even double the mileage or triple the mileage, you should be able to get 1,000 miles per gallon dependably. There's no reason why there's a limit. We're working with unlimited things, so why is there a limit? I've said that from the beginning. When I started getting 125 miles a gallon, I said, why can't we get 275,000 miles per gallon? I think there's probably always going to be, as Robert Hall told us back when we were doing the Hall effect thing, there's always going to be a requirement for fuel. I'm not sure what that is, but I think so. It's not necessarily the case for sure. Next, as far as proving this device out, I think what Gerard's doing is incredibly important because it's totally linear. Our diesel engine cars are run 500,000 miles, 11,000 hours, and they don't change much, but they're still not linear totally. And the last test we did proved that. The one car had a carbon buildup in the intake manifold, and the other car didn't. So the other car beat the car that had the intake manifold carbon by a long shot, almost double. So they're not totally linear. Electronic motors are basically totally linear. They don't deviate unless they break. So I like what he's doing. Next, we work on human bodies with these things, and human bodies are very diverse, as we know. They have lots of different kinds of influences, so they're non-linear for the most part. And I mean, there are certain things about the human body that are linear, but they're very few and far between. We're affected by food, water, epigenetics, environment. Who knows? Love, hate. All the things that we go through every day, they affect our health, and we've talked about that a lot on other tapes. But they are also a lot more responsive than cars to the effects of these frequencies, and a lot more. They're more responsive than they can do things in a millisecond, as opposed to hours or days with with cars. Sometimes we can put these devices on our cars, and they don't really change for a day or two. Most of the times we've seen they do change, but you just don't know. That sometimes 2 days later they get a lot better. So that's it may be linear, but the time change and is not nearly as quick as what the human body can do. I've seen human bodies get well with a phone call. So that they're much quicker. They understand things a lot quicker. We got a lot of things going on here that we don't even touch. So that's the story.